Something has happened which I cannot change. I continue to live, and although woe strikes occasionally, I can find comfort with friends and memories. I can also stay busy enough that I don't have time for sorrows, yet, paradoxically, I am glad for them, since not having them would mean that Beth Ann was not worth grieving over, or that she never existed. Either way, I would lose, because the joy that she gave and still gives my family is such that, though the sorrows be great, her legacy is by far the greater. Weak indeed is the man who cannot bear through his sorrows to uncover his hidden joys. John was the sweetest kid you'd ever want to meet. He was a good big brother. In fact, in John's scrapbook that I made up for him on his 21st birthday, there's a picture of him holding his little sister as a baby just home from the hospital. And it's the sweetest little picture. He should show that to you. They were good friends. You know, when she was just crawling, maybe she would disturb his things while he was playing on the floor, but otherwise, they got along, and he loved his little sister. And then as she got older, you know, we did things together. We went camping in the summer. That's a good family thing when you don't have much money. And then after Beth Ann got sick with leukemia, no matter what game she wanted to play, John always would play with her. Didn't complain. And of course that made Beth Ann happy and made the parents happy. So, to the best of my knowledge, the first one that he wrote was, I think it was the next day. It was within 2 or 3 days after Beth Ann died. And he read that poem at her funeral. And that was good for him and good for us. I would say it takes a lot of creativity to be able to do something like that when you're feeling a lot of grief. And then we had just the last verse of that poem put on the back side of her tombstone. So they just had a special bond. And I can remember when John got his driver's license at the age of 16, and Beth Ann, I believe, was in the hospital at that time. And John came in and told her, she says, "Oh, good, he can take me for a car ride." She was real thrilled about that. So, you know, they did have a very special bond. And the last verse of John's poem, he says, "Through all the coming times ahead, I'll ever dearly miss her. You never know until she's gone how much you love your sister." And I think that's true in a lot of cases, for no matter whether it's a sibling or a parent or a friend. It's after they're gone and you think, oh, I wish I could tell so-and-so this or that. And we just don't realize a lot of the time what special bonds we have right now.
It was the day of my sister's funeral. And I remember going up to my room, and I just felt inspired. I had these thoughts coming into my head, and I pulled out a sheet of paper and put it on top of a book on my bed, and I just started writing. And 20 minutes later, I wrote this poem for my sister, and then I read it at the funeral. And so that was the first real poem I had ever written, and I really felt inspired to write that. She was about 5 years younger than me, not quite 5 years younger than me. And I remember she was sweet and very enthusiastic about things, and she would jump up and down when she was happy. It was really nice, and I felt proud to have a sister, and especially one as nice as the one Beth Ann was. And so when she was diagnosed with leukemia, it was difficult for the family. It was the start of a major roller coaster ride of in and out of remission, and then in and out of remission, and it was just hard. And she was diagnosed when she was about 9, and the doctors did all they could for her, but unfortunately they were not able to heal her. And when she was close to 12, she passed away, and I was about 16. But we were close, and so that was a big loss for the whole family. It really was. It was a way to express myself that I hadn't known before. And when I was in high school, I started learning more about poetry. My first favorite poet was Poe. I had been reading his short stories, and then I got a book that had some of his poetry at the back of it, and I read that. And I still remember my father's mother, who was a Nazarene minister, but she was from West Virginia, and I still remember she read The Raven to me at her house, and I was like, wow, well, this is interesting. It's funny, I'm retired, and I hadn't been doing that much. I had been ushering for something called Kappa in Columbus, Ohio, which includes the Broadway series and symphony, the Columbus Symphony Orchestra, and just different things. And I met somebody on a dating app, and we started talking, and she was a professor of psychology in Ann Arbor, and she had a PhD from Columbia or something like that, and I told her what I was doing, and then I wrote poetry, and we started writing poems together. And she said to me that she was jealous of me that I had the time to write, and I took that very seriously. I was like, you're right, I do have time to write. What am I doing just goofing off when I could be reading and writing? So that got me started reading again. That got me started writing again. And we were taking turns writing poems to each other for a while. It was fun, but that's what kind of kick-started my thing for her, because she wanted to write historical fiction, and she had this dream of writing this historical novel. But for somebody to have a PhD from Columbia and to be jealous of me to have the time to write, I figured, well, I might as well appreciate this gift that I have. I'm doing a lot of open mics, virtual open mics mostly, but and I've been a featured speaker for some of these virtual open mics, and it's nice. So I feel like reading and writing, so I try and read poetry every day. I try and write poetry most every day if I can, at least one poem a week, and that's my conservative goal. If I can do more, then I'm happy. And if it's good poetry, then I'm happy. As long as I'm growing, as long as I'm getting better, that's the main thing for me. This was published in the Lyric in the winter 2022, and it won the winter It won the quarterly award for the winter 2022 issue, so I'm really happy about that. Thank you. Thank you. It's a big deal for me. The ebb and flow of hope. Sunk into the water of the night, my starry hopes caught in the undertow, swirling mid the bubbles in delight, and dazzled by the oceanic glow of starfish and anemones in blue, who dance among the currents seeking prey, my vain desires taking on the hue of all the dreaming denizens held sway by moonstruck hopes and broken tidal wars that flay the ocean floor with back and forth currents grinding shells onto the shores, and I collect the dregs of tidal birth, clawing at the grains of sand and brine. These pitted shards and pearly dross are mine. So I have a friend, family friend. My parents and her parents were friends growing up in Toledo, Ohio, and she was friends with my sister, even though she was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years older than she was. And I shared my website with her, and she said, "Well, it's nice, John, but where's the poem? Where's the poem?" So what I'm going to do for you now is I'm going to read that first poem. It meant a lot to my parents. They used to do these talks, "Don't be afraid to share sorrow," and they would have, a slideshow about my sister and going through the ups and downs of leukemia. Anyway, this is called My Sister. The things I love are very dear. I hate to lose a one. Beth Ann was one of the best of those. I can't believe she's gone. We'll always have the memories to dwell upon each day, the things she's left behind for us, remind us of her happy way. She always was a fighter. She fought it to the last. She put her faith and trust in God. The struggle is now past. She lives within our hearts and minds. We think of her each day. Her way was simple, just, and kind, with always something nice to say. Years will come and years will go along the road of life. I may someday reach the age at which I'll take a wife. But though the days ahead of me be long and fraught with pain, or full of joyous happiness, perhaps 'twill be the twain. Through all the coming years ahead, I'll ever dearly miss her. You never know, until she's gone, how much you love your sister. Thank you. These are poems that I've written in the last 3 or 4 years, so they're considerably different from that first one. And yeah. Anyway, this is a mix of a free verse and formal verse. Mostly free verse, I suppose. Start off with truncated eulogy. Hissed in whispers as the bone-creased fates confer this jackadaw soul plump with blackberry seeds and thorny brambles, wild and wide in bittersweet finesse. Let's fold and braid his starry twine, snip, snip, snuff. The blackened juice dripping from his curled lips, black irises blooming in the blood-soaked bone meal soil. Marrow upon marrow, bleeding out the blunted husk of tomorrow. as the stars cry purple tears, and the vintage years of blackberry paint the moon in phases too dark to remember. This is called Mother Earth Does Not Wait. Mother Earth does not wait at the gates of hell in just regard and jugular motion for transfer of coal black sky built on smogged up lungs to the secret forest of arms that hammer and hew as the bullish sun shines bright in the eyes of his god-crested mother reclining on the throne of Crete. Let Mother Earth search the cyst-dotted, tree-fallen land for the twisted womb that mocks her own, and kisses with safety a product of kingly false sacrifice, divine disgust, and an induced fire of queenly perversion, creating a beast that mirrors the pride that spawned it. Mother Earth does not wait at the gates of hell, but the gate to the labyrinth, the twisted path where horns hunt to gore the feast of offering, while in her mercy she untwists this disjointed beast son, if only to lance assist in the deep underground of fear. This is a change of tone. This is a love poem. This is a formal poem. Ensuing time may pacify my haste to gaze into your sun-drenched olive eyes, or take the goblet of your smile and taste the Chardonnay that lingers with surprise upon your garnet lips and ruddy tongue. And in that moment, time skips in my heart, releasing age, renewing passion young, impatient hands and lips that sweetly part, the dizzy flush in bodies that connect. Anticipation opens up her gates in passion, filling crannies which erect the bridges to unite as hunger waits, the knotted tongues negotiating fires as signals bridge the gulf in tiny wires. I wrote this for my girlfriend who lives in New York City. I got to meet her for the first time around Christmas. Anyway, we met in a virtual world at a poetry reading, actually, and she read Edna St. Vincent Millay poem "Love Is Not All," and not everybody reads Edna St. Vincent Millay, so I complimented her on that, and that started a relationship. But this is based on a story from her past that I embellished somewhat. It's called Escape from Kansas. The slow channel of love in an arterial flow up the estuaries of forested friendship into the perfumed lily garden where bodies touch and sway like the golden bees dancing from bloom to bloom in the slow alchemy of yellow pollen clusters transmuted into honey. Together we sail a bone drift raft out of Kansas, your nylons running as we pole and oar, snagging on the bone spurs that float us past waves moving in fields of flax and wheat. You kiss my blushing cheek, crouching low on the ivory raft, the canvas-masted sail of our desire to be honest and free, sneaking away from the mirrored eyes of conformity as the moon rises over our slow parade of dreams. A flash of beauty, then I close my eyes, enjoying efflorescence in my mind, then focus on each part to analyze and sanctify the bloom with unconfined appreciation for the tints and hues that scatter in my mind like drops of light, condensing on the flora tipped with dew like rainbow ribbons tethered for my sight. The crested sun in purple plumes of cloud unfurls the azure banner of the day. With golden rays of morning so endowed, the blossom's folded petals are displayed within my mind, the dower for a bee, in nectar as my budding thoughts fly free. This is called Cry from the Deep. The woven wicker fields of ocean, in tide-denominated acres of jellyfish, squid, mackerel, shark, and manta ray, stitch the tides together with living veins of coral, while the low-voweled song buried off the continental shelf, born of pain, fathoms on fathoms deep, in the lance-bearing azure mammoth whale, rising to the surface in restless waves of sorrow, pushing the ripple-tiered sea, one terrible slice after another, in grimace after grimace, crashing in frowning ocean spray upon the sand-born gutter of the sea. This is called Moon and Sun. 1. The world wound bleeds from every woman. By the dial of the moon her sacrifice is made. The world groans as folded flesh unwinding and cleaving at the gash with curtains open wide, baptized in light. The crimson night, a darkness that floats inside the mind, a riddle of desire, and cleaving once again into the crimson ocean, the world wound strains to hold another pain. 2. A heart that braids its seasons into a silken plait, in ardor and in candor, in loneliness and shame, beats soft upon the hillock as morning parts her eyes. The same adoring sun that beamed on crucifixion, serving emperor and slave, and God-forsaken woman, scourged for bearing knowledge in her wisdom, is aflame. Born of suffering and shame, as she communes with pain in the hidden, wounded God behind the ever-smiling mask. This is called the iron mark. An iron soul, the mark of divine upon this mortal coil, weighs heavy on the beating heart, adds fire to the eyes that swell with pride, italic sight, ambition in the toil, acute in fight, the taste of rust, a sock upon the jaw. The sails of lust engorged with wind, the mortal pain defies. In boiling blood, no anchor holds, no compass can portend the driving life. Achievement bleeds the sunless sky above, in path to rare Elysium with poppy fields of red. Behind the prow that cleaves the waves, the blessed isles await the Argonaut with blood-stained hands and triumph in his eyes. This is called the scent of flowers. In the fragrant floral bloom of feeding flowers, with purple crocus planted in your throat, the roots plunge deep into the ocean sponge anchored in the rusty iron of your chest, and the speech of velvet petals is like a tolling buoy bell, a chime of warning for the sunken garden of the heart. The sunken garden feeds on evening in a cascade of colored petals, and the velvet sighs fall into the whispering ocean waves, kissing your naked feet, wet to the ankles with starry brine. Born in daylight, blooming nightshade feeds its bitter toxins to the crabs who haunt the shoreline of your soul, clawing for faded meaning in the sun and water-bleached sand and soil and waves on the sunken island of your heart. My faith does not bow down to man or God. My faith does not bow down to man or God, nor any book or dogma of the dead. My coal-stoked heart bakes thought-inducing bread, intensity of passion growing in the grain, hand to hand in shares of love or good intent. Yet in my youth I clawed the sky for God, and in the sieve of thought I tasted words. In glory, puffs of self-aggrandizing lies. In faith, a docile mask that blinds the eyes. Like seaweed fed on sun and brine and mist, in boundless ocean depth I probe unknown, enduring lullaby of ancient whales, alert in mind, confiding empathy and pain in deep measure of deeper sound, sounding the depths of faith. My faith does not bow down to man or God, nor twisted man of darkly swollen pride, who of himself a granite god would make, to punish and to rule the weary and to deride. This is called Let There Be Rain. Squeeze hard upon the charcoal-seeded clouds. Let poetry drip in your open mouth. Succor the images that fall in crowds. Taste them, speak them, limn them in your house. Suck the flavor from a poet's tome. Infuse your brain and graft a hardy sprig. For beauty's sake, in fertile soil grown, harvest the flowers that you plant and dig. Toil the quill, adorn this garden bright, upon the parchment of your fragrant soul. In pregnant dreams, the poetry is flight, to raise your consciousness above the toll of darkness mixed with cold cacophony. And yet, in this dark world, these eyes can see. This is called Emily's World. I wander through your world of sepia. It stains my mind with sun of iodine. The somber glades can hint euphoria in flight of butterfly as you recline, expostulating grace in midday sun that penetrates the pith of winter thoughts, cascading summer in a ripened plum, but on my mind the stain that you have wrought tints deeper every poem that I read, in nature's plain idolatry of verse, or God in some divinity of seed, unto and past the pallor of the hearse. The stain of you is in your leaves of sear. I crinkle them and know that you were here. The gears of time that grind my flesh to dust. The gears of time that grind my flesh to dust, touch not my spirit, light as balmy air, nor dim my soul. The face of time's flecked dial of denominated quadrants, whose hands the seasons hail, slow marching to the drumbeat of the sun, which dances with the moon in swing and sway, with tongues of light that lick and then abstain, in blanketing of snow or spray of rain. Mine is not the first to grist the mill with flesh. Frail birds ablaze with song the grasses feed, and worms devour the carcasses of cats. The gears of time grind memories to dust, but knowledge lingers long upon the tongue. If searing wheels forge wisdom in the soul, professed in naughty words upon a page, my heart will reach, even faltering, its goal, though body should collapse and reason fail. This is called Summer's End. Pink trails of summer trace footsteps in the grass. The ghost of cotton candy flossed between your teeth. Summer's last festival, packed into trucks and cars and carts, late stragglers moving slow from the near abandoned park. Encapsulated music echoes from inside the floating moon of etched antique ivory like a lullaby for drowsy summer. Drooping his painted head, the primrose sheds his garland, crown, one velvet petal at a time, and dream wishes are alive in the sky on the silver tails of shooting stars. I'll do one formal verse and one that's not. A sweet touch. An ounce of uncertainty seasons the touch. Rejoice, my mouth, for these pink lips to kiss, and handles on soft hips as we fall into fantasy. Familiar praises, familiar words to teach, and heart heat warms the body and the soul. In echo plush, I press the waking nerves, imagining soft sounds from softer lips. The candles in my thighs are lit. Your words sink in my heart and glow and heal every fear. Your praise, a warm wash bath. A salt inside me sings and pumps pressure on your oiled valve, compressing pain, and ripening pleasure unwinds the cloistered coil, and the piston pumps hot oil again and again. And this will be the last one. It's untitled. O silver flask of time, how many drops will kiss my tarnished heart, ripe with grain? How many steps on bare, naked snow? To crunch and jest, the willow wags her tail. My harbor in the leaves, rusty, wet with tears. The dog willow bark smoking in my pipe, weeping for forest well nigh to slumber, as stars drip crystal tears on the vagabond road. How many seals jump and skip the frigid Milky Way? What tease of summer sleeps in the milking cows, for whom no sunrise tints the dripping pane, and fed on straw, sleep rises in the mist. The banner of my love hangs in the garden, twisted in the thorns, a bleeding rose white with strawberry milk. Will the flask of time run dry on that? Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And at this point, if you have any comments or questions or anything like that.
I had a couple questions, actually.
Okay.
What starts you with a poem? Is it a thought or an image or a feeling?
Sometimes I have an idea. Often it's like a phrase or a word, and I say, oh, that's a good word. I could write something on that. Just start, I usually write on my phone. So in a little text editor. And so I get an idea and I'll write down a word. And then maybe 10 minutes later I'll have a phrase and then a sentence, and and then I may sit on it for 15 or 20 minutes and I'll say, oh, I've got something else I can go with that. And sometimes it's an idea that I'm trying to express, but often it's just these words, and I feel like I can do something with these words. And I try to say things, and I try to see things from an unexpected viewpoint to make it interesting for people. And so, yeah, that's pretty much how I start. Either an idea or a word or a phrase. Sometimes I get a whole sentence. For quite a while I was writing only sonnets. And I would come up with a first line, iambic pentameter, da-da, 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 da-da. Is that, yeah, okay, write it down. And then, sit on that. And when I first started, in the last 4 years, I hadn't written, I had aspired to write sonnets, but I'd only written half a dozen or so of them. And then I started focusing on them. And I got to a point where I could write a draft in about an hour. And I was like, oh, well, this is fun. And then I would put it in my files, and then a month or so later I'd go back and say, well, this could be better. But yeah, that's kind of my process.
I'm
Yes?
curious, off of Margaret's question, so within your process then, do you feel like the words are coming externally, or is there some part of you that it's embodied also, where like you're carrying it around and then it also comes out?
It's more like I'm carrying it around. It's like it's in my subconscious, and then it comes up and I say, oh, that's an interesting word. I wonder what I could do with that. Mm-hmm. There's this one poem I wrote called Noah's Bones. And I had this idea of bones of jasper. And I was thinking, bones of jasper, that sounds interesting. And I thought about it, and then I eventually came up with the poem Noah's Bones, which I got published a year or so ago. So, but yeah, it's usually something inside me, and that's why it speaks to me, I think. Because it's coming from inside, it's telling me there's more if you keep looking, and you meditate on it, and then slowly, it's kind of like the poems are inside me. Yes, Kathy.
I'm just kind of wondering, have you been like an English teacher or a professor of English, or taught poetry as a profession?
Have I taught poetry as a professor?
Or taught English at a college or something?
No, I never have. In fact, I'm very particular. I probably never would have made it in graduate school because, they tell you have to read stuff, and I'm like, I will read it if I like it, and I will enjoy it, but you can't tell me what to read.
Okay.
So, but at the same time, for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been reading and reading and reading. I had collected a number of books on sonnets for 20 years probably, and they've been sitting on my shelves, and finally I pulled them out and I started reading them, and I read a lot of Elizabethan verse. I had a book called Silver Poets of the 16th Century. I had a book called Elizabethan Sonnets. I had a book called, I still have these books called Sonnet Sequences. And so for a while I was really focusing on sonnets. And then Edna St. Vincent Millay's collected sonnets. She wrote about 180 of them. And I read those over and over again. Yeah. In fact, I had one of them, well, I might have to brush up on it, but I had one of them memorized. And I'm going to use that for the Petrarchan series of teaching sonnets in June. There's 2 weeks in June. We'll be doing Petrarchan sonnets, and I'm going to use and she almost never titled her sonnets, but it starts off, life, though thy pains were as the pains of hell, so hardly to be born, yet to be born. And that's how it starts off. Those are the first lines of it. But it's a beautiful poem. Any more questions?
Margaret, please. And listening to the poem that you wrote for your sister,
Yes.
I currently have a 16-year-old who would never be able to produce a poem like that. And so I wondered, were you dabbling in poetry prior to that? Was that your first?
That's the strange thing. I mean, okay, so I was 16. My first real interest in poetry. My mother used to read me the children's poems of Robert Louis Stevenson. And like, I'm hiding, and no one knows where. For all they can see are my toes in my hair. And a lot of other ones that she would read. And so that was my first exposure to poetry, I suppose. And then in grade school, I was reading the tales of Edgar Allan Poe, and then I started reading his poetry, and I was like, well, these are good. And but we didn't really study poetry in school until I was a senior in high school, and that was after my sister had died. I feel that it was inspired because, it was like I had this sense in my mind. So it was the morning of the funeral, and I went up to my room. I had this sense I had something to write down. I just started writing. I think it was completely inspired. I wrote it in like 20 minutes, and that's how it came out. And I don't think I changed anything after that. So that was, an inspiration to me, and it started me having an interest in writing poetry.
It's a lovely poem.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Do you ever get inspired through your dreams or while you're dreaming?
Well, that's a good question, because the next reading, next month, I'm doing something called, where the title of that group of poems is going to be In Dreams. And I haven't decided. So I wrote, this is the only long poem I've written. It's called The Desert City. And it's 24 stanzas long, and each stanza is a little bit shorter than a sonnet. And it took me 3 months working full-time to write it. And I had, before that, in like the early 90s, I had for a month, I would have these vivid dreams, and I was like, wow, these are interesting dreams. So I started keeping a dream journal. And so I haven't decided. I may read out of that dream journal a couple of the dreams that I put into the Desert City to make it a little bit easier for people to understand. But yes, I do use dreams.
And do some of those dreams or do some of your thoughts turn more towards like songs than readings?
I would like to be able to write songs, but there's one poem I wrote which I called a psalm. It's only 3 or 4 stanzas, and I came up with a melody to go with it. But that's really the only time. Oh, and one of my roommates in college wrote music to go with the poem My Sister, and so he made a song out of that. But yeah, I've always been jealous of musicians, you know. You can go anywhere and play guitar and everybody loves you, but if you're a poet, it's like, you know, it's a different world. So.
And what did you study, John? What did you study in college?
I have a degree in math.
Right. Oh, okay.
I studied at Ohio State. I got a major in mathematics and a minor in computer science. Poetry can be a real catharsis for me. You know, like if there's something that's aggravating me or, you know, some issue I'm working on, it's kind of like the oyster that gets that piece of sand that is an irritant that produces a pearl. You know, sometimes the issues that I'm dealing with lead me into poetry. But in terms of the formulas, well, I mean, at one time I was fluent in about 6 computer languages. And to me, especially if you're writing something formal like a sonnet, you know, it's a lot like writing a computer program. You get one semicolon wrong and it won't run. And so you know, the precision with words is very similar between writing computer programs and writing poetry. In fact, Elvis Costello started out as a computer programmer, and he did that his early 20s or so forth, and then he started writing songs, and he formed Elvis Costello and the Attractions. He's one of my favorite songwriters. He writes really good songs, and his phrasing is outstanding. But did that answer your questions, Bruce?
Could I have an aside to that? So the other day I had tea with a filmmaker, and we were talking about his STEM background, and he said that he's been meeting a number of former computer programmers who are now cinematographers.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which is interesting, and I'm tying that back to you because of the mathematics aspect, and we were trying to think about what that bridge was, why they were leaving that field, and perhaps film. And see, because your poetry is very cinematic, is very, the way the descriptions are very, you know,
Oh, that's
beautiful
true. I
and
try to.
inspired, a lot of imagery.
Yes.
So I just see
yes.
that's the tie. There's something interesting there. That's all.
Oh, thank you. That is an interesting thought. I did have an interest in film once. There was a point when I was going to school at Ohio State, and I took a couple of film classes, and I thought about going into film, but it's you need camera. It's easier now, you know, but this was in the 80s, and you getting a camera, film, you couldn't do it easily by yourself, but I do try to capture images, and I like to have, you know, a flow of images. And so you're right, there is that cinematic, but the math, you know, so not just images, but symbols or metaphors. And in math, you know, you're thinking very abstractly. You know, you're using, you know, this symbol and it balances with this, and so it's definitely, you know, the symbolism, and I was also interested in philosophy, and you know that ties in with the mathematics, finding true formulas. What is true in logic? What is missing in logic? Does God exist? You know, why does he exist, or why doesn't he exist, or she, or however you want to look at it. Yes.
Going along with that thought about formulas or ways of writing or styles of writing, rhyming and without rhyming, or is poetry supposed to be all rhymed to make it legitimate? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so Kathy knows about this open mic on Mondays at a place called Bossy Girls, which is a little bit north of Ohio State on High Street, just half a block north of Hudson. And we have been looking at a number of dead poets, and we started off with, I think we started off with Emily Dickinson, who I had wanted to read for years, and then finally in the last 3 or 4 years I read all of her 1,775 poems a couple of times, and that was very fruitful for me. That Emily's World poem was born out of that, and I wrote several other poems born out of reading her poetry. But, so we started looking at Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, and I was like, I had deliberately avoided modern poetry. I didn't have any interest in the beat poets, and I didn't really know anything about modern poetry. So I said, well, I'm going to start learning. And I found this Yale lecture series on YouTube. The class is called Introduction to Modern Poetry, and there's 25 lectures, and each of them is about 45 minutes long. And so I started following I think, what was the first person we did? Langston Hughes. I certainly watched a lecture on Langston Hughes, and I was reading him. And recently we did T.S. Eliot, and there's 3 lectures on T.S. Eliot, and plus the reading that I did and everything. And and Ezra Pound keeps showing up, this person who was was a pivotal personality in the birth of what we now call modern poetry. And so I've seen, I think, 18 out of the 25 lectures in that series, and it's just grown my understanding. Marianne Moore was part of it. I've also been reading Elizabeth Bishop, who I haven't gotten to her lectures yet. But so the thing is, before World War I, rhymed metered poetry was the norm. And if you didn't write rhymed metered poetry, you were not accepted into the ranks. But in the 1850s or so, Walt Whitman started writing Leaves of Grass, and some of his, in that, which is a collection of many poems. And he kept revising it as he got older and adding to it. But he was really the first to come out and say, we don't need rhyme, we really don't need meter, let's just write. But it took, until like after World War I before there was a real movement doing that. There was also a French poet named Rimbaud, who in the 1870s, at the age of like 16, he started his own little movement of non-rhymed verse, and he's considered one of the starting points for French surrealism, and so Rimbaud and Whitman in the mid 19th century were gristing the mill. They were getting this whole non-rhyme poetry thing going. I like them both. I like a good formal poem, but then I also like free verse. But for me, there has to be imagery or a story or some kind of an epiphany that you're revealing something about a person or an idea, and that's what makes it poetry for me. Oh, yeah, well, the third reading I'm going to do in, February, March, in April, is going to be called, it is titled Truth and Melody. And I've got maybe 8 or 10, I've probably got 10 poems that I wrote that are kind of a, well, here's one I have memorized. It's called Cafe Melody. The cool, clean curves, click-clack, tip-tap, breeze on by, as gold and number leaves flitter, float, fall to muddy soil. Damp air, colored hair, the waitress crosses the room. Coffee, coffee, window, smoke, 50-cent tip. So that's what I call a melody, and that's the kind of music that I like to put into poetry.